You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact. Let me get my big sigh out early on. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we have been watching Violations. It first aired the 3rd of February 1992. It's a story by Shari Goodhart, T. Michael and Pamela Gray, and a teleplay by Pamela Gray and Jerry Taylor. It was directed by Robert Weimar. James, what's this one all about?
The writers sat around thinking, you know what, it's been a while since an alien entered Troi's quarters in the night. We'd better do some kind of psychic rape storyline. A delegation of 3 memory archaeologist aliens are on the Enterprise on their way to a planet to create some kind of history of some other aliens. Everyone is reluctant to use their services except Keiko, because the actor was available. But one of them is clearly a baddie, because sinister music plays when he gets in the turbo lift, and then people keep falling into comas. First Troi, then Riker, and finally Crusher. Data and Geordi investigate comas on other planets, and it turns out this happens a lot when these guys are around. Everyone wakes up, and the bad guy is revealed as the bad guy.
Well, Alex, you've never seen this episode before. What was your opinion on it?
People fall into comas when these guys are around. I mean, it sounds like a review that we get left on iTunes. Well, I mean, it started up with the slightly comedy-looking aliens and the cutaway to the memory shots that reminded me a little bit of Twin Peaks, weirdly. And I thought, oh, okay. I hadn't looked at the episode title. We're lining up for a sort of bit of a knock-around episode, I guess. Then there seemed to be some sort of switch almost to being like a parallel for them discussing the merits of upskirting, and then it just got worse from there.
It starts out a bit sinister with you're not meant to violate people's memories. Oh well, when it's a beautiful woman, how can I resist? And it's like,
yeah,
it's just like what?
We hear sinister music over a particular character, so we're instantly meant to think this guy's the bad guy. It felt very kind of season 1, season 2.
I just don't understand that. Like, it feels like very poor storytelling to basically say out front, this guy is bad. You know, he's doing the evil look into the distance, and the da-da-da music is playing over him. You're just like, what?
The attempt is to make us then think, actually, he's not the bad guy, it was the father, and then do another twist where actually it was this guy.
Was it supposed to be that? Because I always just read that immediately as, oh, well, he's implanting a distraction to mislead people. What were they trying to mislead us?
But surely the better mystery is that they all seem good and fine, but people are falling into mysterious comas. Is that not the better way to play that? I mean, in that opening sequence, I quite like the kind of the interplay, the relationships, the smug, overbearing father, and then Troi obviously sympathises with that. Maybe it's so obvious due to the way they sort of shoot the memories that it is one of them that's doing it, that is clearly the cause, because we're getting inside people's heads. I just thought Troi, you know, she feels a little stressed out because she starts having this sort of this flashback, and then the first thing she does, of course, is like get a nice hot chocolate. Some fine character work there with her trait.
Her twin traits of drinking hot chocolate and being subject to horrendous violations, yeah.
Yeah.
How many times has this happened to her now?
Well, she's got chocolate loads of times.
I can't remember. Last time we spoke about it, because we said, how many times has this happened? I feel like it must be about 4.
It's definitely more than once previously. And the fact that it's more than once previously alone is
And it definitely happens at least once again in exactly the same way.
In the films.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get something else before that point.
And with a name check, it was a violation.
Do you know what? I didn't quite get the memory at first. I was like, oh, it was after a poker game. They're tidying up, and she drops all the chips on the floor, right? And
he spills his coin everywhere.
Is that the end of the real memory?
But I didn't think that it was actually a real memory, because what happens with Riker wasn't a real memory, was it? He didn't have a situation where he had to leave people behind in the warp core.
Well, I don't know.
Because then Beverly seems to be a real memory, so...
Yeah. Is it like a part of a real memory, or is it a punishment? Because I was like, where does the real memory start and the fake one begin? Because she was like, oh, this is a happy memory. And then it's like, well, Riker's trying to force himself on you. And then there's...
I didn't think that any of the memories were real, because did she actually go and see her dead husband?
I don't know.
Is there anything to indicate that was a real memory as well?
I just assumed they were all real memories, but then they were twisted in some way to punish them.
I think the way that Troi talks about it at the end suggests that it is, at least in the beginning, a genuine memory. That
one from Troi, I mean, it's not graphic, but the suggestion, the sort of the close-ups and grabbing of flesh it's quite disturbing, I would say, like in its suggestion for a sort of tea time on BBC Two show.
Yes, I was surprised at how far it actually did go. It feels like it's gone about as far as it could do in the time slot.
It's quite unpleasant.
They felt they had to do that to get across the point. But the problem is, they then actually just say it as well.
And as much as Star Trek should perhaps be covering difficult and challenging topics, yeah, did they need to do that? Surely corrupting the memory is making the point that they want to make. Although obviously or is it just that they want to make sure everyone knows that this man is an extreme pervert, like, and really, really a bad guy, rather than just doing something horrible with people's brains?
I mean, I guess the argument that is that it's an important subject, and although you can do it all through metaphor and subtext, perhaps it's more effective to have it as the genuine article, albeit through a dream. It's whether it feels out of place in the particular program, I suppose, is more the question. Does this feel as if it's going outside of TNG's remit? But then, if it is, should it be? Should it feel that it is, when the subject matter is obviously an important one? It's an important a subject as when Star Trek has tackled race before. It's a difficult one, and one that three straight white men are uniquely ill-equipped to come to a conclusion on. Yeah, I would say it feels shocking for the type of program that it is, and at the time it is made. But obviously, that is the point.
I think that is my only criticism of it. I don't have an issue with them using an actual rape within the corrupted memory to hammer home the point. It's the fact that they then hammer home the point again in the dialogue. They should have let their metaphor speak for itself. It feels like they're talking down to the audience by basically telling us what they mean.
I think it's because of the subject matter, though. I think that's the reason that they do that, is to really hammer home, we are talking about rape here.
Yeah.
I think actually the really troubling aspect of it as well is when she wakes up and has no memory of it. I think that's quite. I guess that's why you have to show it as explicitly as they did in order for you to go, oh well, that is really grim. That's worse than you can possibly kind of imagine it, because having something done to you and then having no memory of it is actually somehow worse, even if it removes an element of the trauma. But in some ways that's done just so they can have the twist, isn't it?
I suppose, but then also there's plenty of examples of victims that the experience has been so traumatic that they have blanked it out in that way. So I suppose it's also it's not beyond the bounds of actual reality too. I do sort of wonder what a version of this episode looks like with the fantastical sci-fi element removed. I mean, grim, obviously, but
yeah, it's a horror episode, and I think we have said that often TNG, when it's done its horror episode, hasn't gone far enough in its scares, or it's been a bit flat, whether that's due to the lighting or whether that's just due to the direction. I think the direction of these moments, like you said, I think it is quite Twin Peaksy. Obviously they've put that sort of slightly wide angle lens on the camera. It gives a really different quality to the memories. The sort of movement of the camera as well is it's good. It's nice coding without completely going black and white or something like that. It does indicate a different mindset, I suppose. I think all of it kind of works. It's just, is this an issue that Star Trek Next Generation should cover? Sure it is. Do we want to see the female characters sort of tortured for our entertainment?
It's also specifically, I think, that also feels a murky area because of the fact they're doing it to Troi again.
Yeah,
I feel like if this was a one and done guest star, it would carry weight.
Or even
but it feels particularly
somebody like Ensign they could have brought back Ensign Rao.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's the fact that it's Troi and that we have seen variations, subtler variations on this before, it just gives it that extra ick feel. But then again, I suppose the question then becomes, is that just laziness of picking that's the person to do it to, or is it a deliberate choice because that's the character that doing a more on-the-nose version will be the most affecting with it. That's one that can really only be answered by the writers, I suppose.
It kind of feels horrible to say, but I guess she's seen as the most vulnerable of all of them.
Well, that's what I mean. If that's, yeah, the motives are up for question, but
it should be pointed out that the teleplay was by two women and the story was two women and one man. So it's not coming from the completely a man's perspective. So when we question the writing, we're not questioning whether it's misogynistic or anything. I guess it's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
To close up talking about that the Troi scene, I guess the initial crime of the episode, the one thing no one talks about is she spills that hot chocolate all over her nightie, and I just wonder how hot was that, because that could really burn. No one mentions that at all.
I mean, it could be Nesquik.
In the future, they have special flame retardant nighties.
That's good. That's all I needed to know.
You talking about closing off the initial crime there? That is something I was debating after watching the episode. Is Do you feel that? I mean, there's three violations that take place in this story. Is this the most effective order of them taking place? Because obviously the Troi one is by far the most shocking. Is it more affecting to have that one up front, or would it be more affecting reversing it and having it building to the absolute crime? I'm not sure.
You're right. It does almost,
because the other two are very different. You know,
well, they're preventative, aren't they?
Yeah, they are violations of someone's personal space, but they are not. They're not that same intimate violation, apart from, say, in Beverly's case, the violation of an intimate, traumatic moment, and therefore both of those are much less affecting and more slight than the initial one. But then you lose the shock factor of having the big one at the front.
But am I misremembering, or does he intentionally invade the memories of Crusher and Riker because he wants them to go into a coma? He wants to basically get them out the way.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Riker obviously has that very terse meeting with him in 10 Forward where they have the conversation, and Riker's clearly a bit sus about this guy, and I would guess his instincts are telling him that he is the perpetrator no matter what, and so it's, well, he's investigating, I'm going to stop this, and then it's Dr. Crusher's discovered it's not this illness, it's actually something else, and then it's take her out. It's a very inefficient way of kind of dealing with that situation, because it's clearly pointing towards, we were getting closer to finding out what that was, but that's fairly standard in the sort of procedural kind of serial killer genre. Misgivings aside, or there's interesting stuff in here, because obviously it's about the nature of memory, and that's a sort of a very Philip K. Dick kind of realm of science fiction, which I'm not sure, like, well, TNG does delve into it with the inner light, and I just think it's a very interesting avenue to go down, the sort of psychological horror of that. What is a real memory? What do we really remember? And it's set with Keiko's I've forgotten childhood memories, and then Data saying, well, I remember every moment as a moment, it's all stored here. What are human memories like? Oh, well, they're very different. The most traumatic ones are often the most intense. I think there's quite a lot to explore here, but I don't know if it ever does that. I think it's the aliens are an effective plot device, but I think there's probably more interesting things being said about memory and other science fiction, which maybe isn't fair given this is a 45-minute episode of Star Trek Next Generation.
Well, it plays into the theme. The I don't want to say the debate around rape, because there's no debate to be had, but, people say that, horrible people say that, you can't trust, memories on the way certain things happen and all that. And I think even more so in the 1990s, particularly the early 1990s, the topic of memories and false memories and rape would be much closer tied, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it's almost a metaphor for gaslighting. Your memory, you can't trust your memory. This is not what happened. This is the way it happened. And yeah, that ties in very effectively. And it's interesting as well when the crew are offered the opportunity to remember or have the aliens delve into their minds. They're all very reluctant, and I think we all probably would be, because these things are very private, and whatever you've repressed, you've repressed probably for a pretty good reason. Picard in particular is not interested in sharing his memories, and I think we all know why that is.
Oh yeah, he's hiding that time his mum hung herself.
Jeez, I just about forgotten about that.
This episode has gained such significance now. Oh, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the writers of Picard were really thinking of this episode and Picard's reaction when they wrote season 2 of Star Trek Picard, because it's all so connected and so thoughtful, and like that in-depth psychological exploration of the character of Jean-Luc Picard. But also remember when he mind melded with Sarek.
And Sarek said, "It's so sad that your mother hung herself. You have so much trauma."
What's the deal with all the Borg in the walls of your house? On the subject of Picard, what's that thing on the side of his head?
Oh yeah, I didn't understand that either. Well,
I'm not talking about the wig.
I was about to say wig.
Yeah, he's got a weird... Is that meant to be he's got some medical device on after the death of Jack Crusher? I don't know what that was. No.
Oh, wasn't he on the ship when Jack Crusher died? So but the insinuation be that he was injured as well.
Yes, but it just looked like a weird... It seemed like an unnecessary thing to have on, because I was like, what's that? But some good time coding, some strong wig work all round there. Patrick Stewart's excellent balding man look, and nice sort of Bryce Dallas Howard look for Beverly Crusher.
Very inaccurate, of course, because as we know from Star Trek Nemesis, he should be bald by this point anyway.
I was literally just saying that.
I mean, he doesn't look anywhere near enough like Tom Hardy for my taste.
Is that specifically because of Star Trek Nemesis, or is that just in general?
It gives you an opportunity, this episode, to play with the past and I guess play with some elements of the show that you've not seen before. You almost want to see more of that, the Jack Crusher story. I mean, that's quite interesting. Like, what's your biggest life trauma? And it's sort of inconsistent. If it was that, it's like he's going to bring up their worst thing they remember, but it's not that, because obviously with Troi, it's I am basically creating that trauma for you. But then did Riker essentially order someone to their death or lock them in the warp core, and reliving that is his worst moment, or did that never happen? It's all very unclear. If it was more twisted, then, if they did add more horror elements, if you had a warp burned zombie coming out of it or something like that, or Jack Crusher strangling everybody, then, well, that would be horrendous. But as they stand, they absolutely work to get the plot to the point where you want to get it.
You have now just got me thinking, though, what are the worst days of everyone else's life? We know, as we talked about on the previous podcast, that there was an intention of showing Geordie in a fire before he got his visor. But, what are the worst days for everyone else? Worf's when he lost a bit of honour. I mean, that's happened so many times. Miles O'Brien, it's just any day of his life.
Worf did lose both of his parents. He was very young. And he also did lose his girlfriend.
And then murdered someone the same day. And he had to then take care of a child. The worst of all three of those. Who else is there?
Who's the one that spills hot chocolate over herself?
Sonia Gomez.
Sonia Gomez.
I mean, yeah, the second spilling of hot chocolate in Star Trek Next Generation, and I would say this one doesn't quite live up to the first, does it?
No, far less drama.
Sonia Gomez's nightmare. It's like in The Shining when the elevator doors open, except it's hot chocolate pouring out.
Chief Engineer Argyle, just nobody sends any letters, and he doesn't get to become the main chief engineer on the Enterprise.
Just Picard in engineering. You're fired. I'm getting an ensign to replace you.
I mean, Beverly's got the death of her husband, and yeah, that's up there. But I would have thought, it's a boy, Mrs. Crusher, is probably equally awful.
So the investigation. We spoke last time about investigations, and here's another one. Geordi ends up leading it after Dr. Crusher disappears. It's another one of these great Star Trek Next Generation investigations where it's, let's ask the computer some questions and then sort of get a little annoyed at the computer, and we're like, well, your parameters are not great, Geordi. And then Data and Geordi sit at a console and push some buttons. Basically, surfing the internet for answers about where people have been. It's just not that dramatically satisfying.
All that power on the bridge, and they spend their days Googling. It's like me during my day job. Unless my employers are listening, then I that's absolutely not me during my day job. I'm a very productive member of staff.
They're not listening.
No. It's anyone.
Pretty much half of Star Trek The Next Generation's episodes could be resolved much sooner if they did have Google. I mean, they could have just put the alien's name and coma into Google and they would have found the answer straight away.
I guess the other type of investigation they would do is they go to a planet, they speak to some people, but I mean, why do that when you can just film one shot on the bridge and be done with it? It wraps that up so much more easily.
I do like the indignation of the aliens when they want to investigate them. They went, this can't possibly be anything to do with us. We just happened to come on board, and at the same time, 3 people have fallen into comas.
This has never happened before, except for all these other times when we were visiting other planets, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence.
I mean, was the father protecting his son there? Did he know, really? Not maybe not consciously, but did he not want to admit to himself that his son was doing these horrible acts?
I don't know. The way he treats his son is obviously with a certain amount of disdain, but I guess he thinks he's just not very good at the memory manipulation. I don't think there was any implication that he was culpable in it, that he knew that might be something he was capable of.
Well, no, maybe not consciously, you know. I imagine there's a lot of murderers whose parents didn't think that they could do that, but they knew that they were not very nice people.
It's an interesting approach to the investigation of them. There's obviously a very diplomatic softly, even though it's fairly clear that there's something not right going on with them. That they're like, we would just ask you if you could maybe stay in your quarters, if you could maybe not touch people's brains. That would be really great if you could just do that. And but I suppose it is that ambassadorial protection. It's that, well, we're above this. How dare you accuse us of a crime, because we are good people doing good things, and it's maybe hard to imagine that people could do something so awful. And in many ways, that's good, because we're in this future where it's almost impossible to imagine a crime like this taking place, because we'd left that in the past. But then you just have this one outlier who is clearly doing very bad things. So I guess the suggestion is then that this is not something that goes on normally in society. So it is very much there's something very, very wrong. I'm so glad I articulated that so well.
We're in this future where, you know, there's hardly any crime at all, and then you just compare the crime statistics of the rest of the Federation with the Enterprise itself. It doesn't reflect well, does it?
What do you think of them just waking up?
That's pushing home the point about memory loss, isn't it?
Is it?
Oh, they lose their memory of what happened, don't they?
Yeah, the coma is almost a symptom of their memory of that event being wiped out. I just find it a little bit unsatisfying. I almost want there to be a medical investigation to bring them out of the coma, but I suppose that's not really the important part of the episode.
Well, I guess it's kind of almost reflecting real life. The way, you know, a perpetrator of rape would just leave their victim, or in a lot of cases would. And it's not a very nice topic, but the episode itself isn't very nice.
Nothing presented here is particularly pleasant.
But do you think it works as an episode of entertainment, as a good Star Trek horror episode? Or do you think that the things that are problematic about it take away from that?
I don't think it's problematic. I think we've criticised certain approaches, but I think it's what they've done is worthy. I'm glad that they've made this attempt.
I kind of think, in some respects, trying to judge it as a good Star Trek episode, I kind of feel, in some respects, you have to divorce it from Star Trek a little bit, because again, that idea of, oh, is this going too far for an episode of Star Trek, etc. I mean, you could argue that yes, it is, but it's doing so because of the subject that it's dealing with. You wouldn't do this every week unless you were a different Star Trek show altogether. It's deliberately trying to be outside of the mould, so you kind of have to judge it on its own terms, I think, rather than with the wider show to some degree.
Anyway, hey, let's go in and undermine any serious discussion we've had in Quickfire. Riker was in a coma in Shades of Grey, our favourite episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and he mentions those events in this episode. Always falling into comas, Riker. Can't get enough of them.
Of all the episodes to reference, they reference Shades of Grey. Well, then again, that episode was all about memory. This is the only episode of Next Generation or Deep Space Nine in which Rosalind Chow appears as Keiko without Colm Meaney. You can just imagine him furiously rushing on set and speaking with Rick Berman. How dare I not be in last week's episode?
I was off making a real film.
I demand a spin-off of my own.
Turning to the bulging Bible of Bilge that is the Nitpicker's Guide, I did sort of go in wondering what this would address, given the weighty themes of this episode. Would it be inappropriate? But then I thought, well, actually, what it's probably going to do is spend about 5 pages talking about the fact that in the flashback, Riker has a beard, but does not have a beard in season 1, and therefore presumably had a beard, shaved it, and regrew the beard, as if that would be something worthy of discussion. But instead, under great moments, Phil Farron says, this episode contains one of the best food replicator effects in the entirety of Star Trek The Next Generation. Great. Glad that the messages and themes really hit home there.
10 out of 10.
So, some various reactions from people working behind the scenes. Brandon Braga said, it's a great science fiction show and I'm a big fan of surreal imagery. We had a good story, mind rape, mental violation of memories, and it becomes an oblique science fiction metaphor for a compelling issue of today. Beautifully directed stylistically, the most daring show we've ever done. Fair. Jonathan Frakes criticised the choice of flashback for his character. He remarked, where did Riker rushing people out of engineering come from? That's a no-brainer. Riker would just say, that's the way it is. People die. Shit happens. His worst fear is not rushing people out of engineering. That didn't come out of character. Michael Piller counteracted this. You have to make sure you don't misinterpret what the guy was doing. He was basically going into your memories and playing in them for his own amusement, pleasure and fulfillment. He was not going in and exploring any character's greatest fear. He might go in and feel that today he wants to see Troi's sexual secrets and tomorrow he might want to see Riker's unhappiest memory and see him suffer. I don't think it's something Riker carries with him as a burden for the rest of this life. It's a memory, it's just part of his life, just like Tasha's first death would be for him. Okay, yeah. So, it's sort of just random memories then.
According to this book I'm looking at, originally an earlier draft had Miles O'Brien as a victim.
Nobody noticed for days.
Don't worry, he gets his punishment on Deep Space Nine.
And Ensign Rowe as well. Rowe's unexplained trouble on Garen 2 was going to be featured.
See, that's not a bad idea, because then that uses something that's been previously referenced but never actually explored.
No, we won't use that. We'll use the time that Riker killed everyone on the warp core. You remember that? The murderer.
I think the problem was with that entire sequence is we didn't see Geordi rolling underneath the closing door, which is a vital part of any warp core breach.
Geordi learned rolling around when he was 5 years old and his house was on fire.
He stopped, he dropped, he rolled.
Exactly.
Well, that's us done for another week. We will be back again soon, and we'll be talking about the Masterpiece Society. I know that's a lot of people's favourite. Until then, goodbye.
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 Oh, it's a master plan. I hope they talk about it in Star Trek Picard Season 3.
All of Picard Season 3, all the characters are in a coma, just remembering things from Star Trek The Next Generation.